There's a massive housing bubble that's about to burst, and I figured out where and when it's gonna happen. The dust is beginning to settle, and we're finally starting to see the devastating effects that the pandemic had on the US housing market. There's a massive gap showing you just how divided this housing market is. As a real estate agent, I'm in the trenches every single day buying and selling homes. We are teetering on the edge of a housing market crisis.
Do you believe we can have a soft landing?
No, it's impossible. People have to realize the enormity of this bubble. There is not a comparable bubble in real estate. This is going to be worse than the crash before, and it's going to be way worse than the real estate crash in the Great Depression.
Throughout the last few months, I've pieced together a scary trend that's happening in the South, which is going to foreshadow what's going to come in the North.
Winter is coming.
But first, I need to warn you, this is the least affordable time in the last few decades to buy a home.
New data shows a growing portion of the U.S. is becoming unaffordable for people looking to buy a home.
There's a new study out of Harvard that has found millions of Americans are simply being priced out of home ownership.
The U.S. home price index is 47% higher than in early 2020. That's pushing the median sales price to about 5 times an average household income.
The American South, particularly states like Florida, Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee, are one wrong move away from going belly up. I'm predicting over the next 12 months, that bubble will finally burst, and I have evidence why. Oh yeah, and this billionaire bozo agrees too. Roll the clip.
We're gonna have the biggest real estate correction we've ever had here in the next 12 months. It'll be monster, and it will hit Gen Zs in a way that they'll never touch that asset class again.
This is exactly why I am telling you not to buy a home right now. And remember, I'm a realtor, so let that sink in for a moment. Like Grant Cardone said, this will be a traumatizing experience that most people will never recover from. I just had a listing, and this exact same scenario just happened to a client of mine. They bought the house 2 years ago, but they were losing hundreds of dollars renting it out every single month. The bank was on the verge of seizing her home until I finally got it sold, but at a huge loss. With inflation and the price of homes supposedly going up according to the news, this should never have happened. But it did, and it's happening more frequently than you may think. However, this is not happening throughout the entire country. This is happening only in certain southern states. And I'm going to show you what is happening in the northern states later in the video, which is going to shock you. So let me explain how we got here and what is going to happen. During the pandemic, the South saw a migration boom. At the time, people from northern states like New York and New Jersey, they were trapped in their home, stuck paying a very high cost of living. The combination of rock bottom mortgage rates and cheaper living lured people down south. They can now work remote, so those lower taxes and warm climate seemed awfully appealing to people wanting to move to those southern states. All the cheap existing homes in places like Florida and Texas, those were bought up, lowering the inventory by up to 80%. So home builders went into overdrive and started producing homes to meet that new demand. And that was all fine, until it wasn't. Not as many people are moving south anymore, meaning supply is starting to go up because demand is starting to go down. People are actually moving back to the northern states because the cost of living has gone up so much in the South.
One Florida region is seeing some of the highest number of move outs, and that is South Florida. Take a look at this. The Miami region sitting at number 3. The once red-hot market of Austin, Texas is 5th on the list of most move-outs. Again, this is all.
This oversupply of homes in the South is leading to price corrections. But I know for certain that we're just getting started. Pay close attention to this. My theory is that states like Massachusetts, New York, and New Jersey are just 1 or 2 years behind states like Texas and Florida, which are now starting to crash. There are currently 454,000 houses for sale according to Realtor.com. This figure is up 50% from last year, and it's now creeping up to pre-pandemic levels. That inventory is only 17% less than before the pandemic. But here's the real issue. Prices of homes are still 40% higher. The median price of a home is now $445,000 compared to $325,000 that it was before the pandemic hit. And in some areas like Tampa and Miami, prices have literally doubled. These prices are unsustainable at these rising inventory levels because the interest rates are so high. What should have taken 20 years to happen happened in 5 years, and people cannot afford these prices anymore.
What is keeping you from relocating? Currently, the interest rates and house prices are just insane.
So how exactly does this southern housing market bubble burst? In states like Florida and Texas, sales have started to slump, causing the price of homes to go down and inventory to rise. That's because the Fed has been raising interest rates at the fastest rates since the 80s to try and correct the housing market.
The Fed raised interest rates 11 times starting in March of 2022, but only once since this past May.
That's right, 11 times in the last 2 years. But that's a good thing. Without those higher interest rates, we would not have seen supply increase at the rate that it has.
The only way to make this work is to increase supply.
That's right, Mr. Wonderful. Once we reach that pre-pandemic level of inventory, sellers are going to have no choice but to start slashing prices, which is what we are slowly starting to see now. But we have a long ways to go. For example, in Austin, Texas, the new median home sale price is now 3% less than it was last year. Now, this could be a gradual bubble pop that happens over the next year or so. However, what could cause a sudden burst would be an economic downturn, something like a recession, or even the Fed raising interest rates. It's very possible that Jerome Powell instead raises rates, causing the housing market to suddenly collapse. Powell just came out and said that rate cuts are coming, but he refused to say when and how many. I think that's a very telling sign of what's to come. He was even bolder last year and claimed that they were going to decrease rates 3 times in 2024. But here we are in Q4 and we have not had a single rate drop since.
Fed said, well, just kidding. Maybe we're not going to be as aggressive as we had mentioned. People stopped.
Now they have an even weaker stance on dropping rates. What makes me actually believe they're going to drop rates again? I don't think they are. The Fed is still targeting a 2% inflation rate, and we're hovering around 3% right now. So there's a very good chance after the election, they do start to increase the rates again. For obvious reasons, I don't think they're going to do anything like that before the election. However, 2025 is still free reign. And regardless of who gets elected, I believe that the Fed knows what needs to be done to bring stability back to this housing market and economy. And that is increasing interest rates. And the nation's top economists agree with me, saying the Fed is most likely going to keep the federal funds rate above 2.5%, which is the Goldilocks zone, up until 2026. The Fed is rightfully afraid that it could reheat inflation again or reverse the progress on the housing market if they start to drop rates too soon. All these signs are pointing towards a crash. Whether it'll happen gradually as we're seeing right now, or it'll happen rapidly like we did back in 2008, well, that remains to be seen. But one thing remains crystal clear. If you are in the market to buy a house right now, do not do it unless you plan on holding the house for at least the next 10 to 15 years. If you have any doubt whatsoever that you're not going to be able to make those payments for the next decade or so, then it's a disaster waiting to happen. Instead, just wait it out another year or two until the market finally bottoms out, and you'll know when to buy. Once they start dropping rates again, that's the time. Make sure you get in at the start of the rate drops, because once they start lowering rates, prices of homes are only going to start going up as supply starts to drop. Every 1 percentage point decrease triggers 3 million buyers to enter the market, then simply refinance later once the rates have dropped low enough. Now, this is going to blow your mind. Texas and Florida combined now have the highest inventory of any region in America. This is because prices have spiked the most in those 2 states compared to the rest of the country. But just wait, it gets really bad for the northern states. In Texas and Florida, there are 249,000 homes for sale, while there are only 90,000 in the entire Northeast. What's wild about this is before the pandemic, Texas and Florida had the exact same amount of inventory as the entire Northeast did. But now there's a massive gap showing you just how divided this housing market is. It's only a matter of time before the Northeast and the Midwest goes through the exact same crash that's happening right now in these southern states. Just not yet. The inventory of homes is still far too low, as you can see, meaning prices in these northern regions are still less overvalued because inventory is much lower. There are still bidding wars and houses are selling in days in the Northeast, which is exactly what happened to states like Florida and Texas, but now buyers are starting to feel the consequences. Imagine this. You've spent the last 10 years saving every nickel and dime that you've ever earned, and you're finally able to buy your first home. So you buy a house and everything is fine and dandy at first. Some time passes and then out of nowhere, you lose your job. You can't afford to make your house payment anymore, and you need a way out. Your first thought is to sell, except it's too late for that. The housing market has already burst and now you're underwater, meaning your house is now worth less than you initially paid for it. So your next thought is to become a landlord and rent it out. Great idea. But wait, you find out all your neighbors' houses are being rented out for less than your all-in monthly payment. So that won't work. So there's only one option left. You're forced to give your house back to the bank. That's right, you've just been foreclosed on. After the housing prices finish crashing in the South, it's going to become more appealing again for the Northerners to move back down there, which is going to cause inventory to start to rise again in the northern states, thus evening out the supply and prices just like we saw pre-pandemic. And just like that, it'll complete this generation's housing market crash cycle. My name's Andy Coleman, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. All right, that was pretty good.